All right, hello, welcome everyone to the House of Mystery, a John Constantine and Friends podcast. If you're new to the show, you can find all of our shows, past, present, and in the future, wherever you listen to podcasts. But our preferred place for you to listen is Apple Podcasts, as well as Spotify. Just search House of Mystery, and be sure to leave us a review, give us a 5-star rating. I know I appreciate it. As well as the demon bisexual butler, David. He also appreciates it.
Absolutely. I especially appreciate it when they decide to clean up after themselves after their time in the House of Mystery.
Do people not clean up after themselves usually?
No.
Like,
People are savages, Mike.
What does the bathroom look like typically? Is there like shit on the wall like when you walk into a Circle K?
Oh, you don't want to know. Yeah. It's usually we have to replace it and use a power washer in that room.
That's a bunch of savages. All right, so in this episode, we are officially kicking off our Night Terrors coverage with a discussion on Night Terrors First Blood #1.
Yeah.
It's a one-shot that lays the foundation for DC's 2-month event. Essentially, Night Terrors is the next Dawn of DC milestone event that takes place all of this month and all of August, and will feature a host of 2-issue miniseries, each spotlighting a DC superhero or supervillain confronting their worst nightmares in a nightmare realm. Now, DC, David, during this event will actually halt publishing nearly all of the regular titles to focus on this event.
Yes.
Now, we are John Constantine and Friends podcast, so we will not be covering all of the issues, which would be impossible for us anyways, but we'll be focusing on the core issues because it's dealing with the darker side of DC, which is our jam. That is what we do. And many of our favorites will be making appearances. In fact, going by what Williamson did in the First Blood, and in the first issue, First Blood, it seems like Deadman will be a major player throughout the run of Night Terrors.
Yes, he will. And me and you have discussed about Night Terrors and basically the possibilities of this series. And in 1 month's time, that basically Night Terrors has been getting closer to release, and then it got released with a couple of the first issues and preludes. It has taken comic book readers by storm.
Yeah.
Like, I have gone to so many fan forums talking about Night Terrors and people basically saying, this is the story that basically DC looked at Marvel and slapped them in the face and basically said, this is our time now. You take the back seat.
Look at them.
And because a lot of fans are digging Night Terrors because everyone thought, oh, it's going to be, I mean, me and you discussed about it in a couple shows ago.
Well, these events they're hit or miss.
They're hit or miss.
They're either pretty good or just awful.
Yeah. And like the one thing about Night Terrors, it seemed like, wait a minute, this looks like more it was supposed to be a Halloween special type of event for DC.
Yeah, I'm still a little at odds with that. Like, it seems like it would have made more sense if it came out, let's say, September, October. But then as people have been like reading it, especially after the first issue, and then more issues have been coming out, this story has been like filled with so many possibilities. People are talking about like how DC is changing their landscape now, how they're maybe introducing older elements than that we haven't seen since Vertigo, and bringing it all together with not only Vertigo, but also tying in all their past events, the past 2 years, and saying, yeah, all the events that happened that we've been writing about
all that is canon.
They better do something with all that Vertigo content. I mean, fuck, motherfuckers canceled it, and then you have all this awesome, stories, characters that have just been completely halted. We might as well start digging through that little treasure trove and using it, right?
Oh, absolutely.
To some degree, at least.
And then that's why I know me and you have discussed it about off air, but just to reaffirm our thoughts that me and you prior talked about, not having John Constantine in this series is so irritating.
It is a little strange. Now, I'm sure because John Constantine is on a few of the covers, the variant covers that were promoted, but it does seem strange yet again. David, I wasn't going to get into this quite yet because I was trying to be a little more positive, but of course you love when I'm negative and you bring up such
we're going to build you
polarizing things.
We're going to build you up.
Is that what we're going to do?
Yes, we're going to build you up. We're going to build you up.
How do you have a series like this that delves deep into the genre of horror, dealing with this weird connection between nightmares and magic, I believe is what they said.
Yes.
And John Constantine doesn't have a title. I don't understand this, Dave. None of it makes sense anymore.
Yeah.
What is up is down and down is up.
Especially,
what's real, David?
Here's the thing. I
don't be a DC apologist.
I don't want to be an apologist.
Because I will line you up and shoot you down like the rest of the Nazis.
But
with the rest of the Nazis, not like the Nazis.
There might be a method to the madness of the characters they chose. Because the main characters, you have the entire DC universe being affected by night terrors, by this new brand new villain that they introduced.
Yeah, don't get into spoilers yet.
I'm not going to do that. But the main characters, tying them in, it kind of it's making more sense to me, the lineup that they chose. They chose a character like Deadman to be front and center.
Well, I'm happy about that. And that's the reason why I'm not angry about the John Constantine aspect, because I love Deadman as well. And the fact that they're using him essentially as I guess you can say a narrative anchor, or
he's the narrative anchor.
Yeah.
And especially when you get further along in the series, you begin to realize Deadman plays an incredible role, because he is one of the characters that would not be susceptible to what's going on in the DC universe.
Yeah.
So, okay, I see the logic there. Zatanna, she would also have an advantage in this story because
she's hot.
Well, yeah, but she would be able, because she would be prepared after what she's been through with the Upside Down Man.
Right. And let's not get into
that issue
lots
yet.
of stories too much, because I don't want to confuse people, because there's
a lot.
Even though the writers for Night Terrors, they are in fact relying on a lot of recent things, which is good. That's a good thing for readers of DC Comics. But if you're just getting in, you can also view this as a bit of a entry level as well, because they do a pretty damn good job of explaining things so that new readers can just jump in and follow along. Now, David, before we get too deep into the discussion, I want to share with everyone what issues we're actually going to cover on this show, because as I said, we can't cover all 50 some issues, however many there are out there, because it's not possible. So we've handpicked issues that we feel are relevant to our show, The House of Mystery. So we obviously are covering the very first issue here, Night Terror's First Blood #1, which is a one-shot. It gets the story going. Night Terrors 1 through 4 is what we'll be covering. Night Terrors Zatanna 1 and 2, and then Night Terrors Night's End, which is the final installment. It's the epilogue. So we're going to cover the core issues, the Zatanna tie-in, and then the epilogue.
Yeah.
We might throw in Night Terrors Wonder Woman. I'm not sure yet. It depends on whether or not Justice League Dark ends up playing a bigger part in the story, because I have not had a chance to peek through the pages yet of Wonder Woman, but just judging the covers. The covers show Constantine, Detective Chimp, and I believe some other member of JLD. I can't remember who. So obviously they have some role to play.
Yeah.
But if it's just a nightmare aspect and it really isn't any core development going on for the characters, then we'll pass on it. So we may add a few, and we're going to try to keep on track with these. So, for example, this week we're releasing First Blood, #1. And then next week we're going to try our damnedest to knock through the first 2 issues of Night Terrors.
Yeah.
And then the following week will be Zatanna. And then by the time we release that, Night Terrors 3 and 4 will be close on our heels.
Yes. Because they are not like holding back with this series.
No, not at all. All right, so to get things started, let's delve into First Blood #1's official press release. It reads, kicking off the line-wide event is the oversized special Night Terrors First Blood #1 from Joshua Williamson. He's currently the writer of Superman, and Howard Porter, The Flash. When Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman find the body of one of their earliest enemies inside the Hall of Justice, their investigation takes them past the land of the living, beyond the land of the dead, and directly to a new villain who uses his powers to engulf every single hero and villain in their own dark and twisted nightmares. The only way to save the world is to call for the help of an unlikely hero, Deadman. That had me sold right there.
Oh, yeah. And the beautiful thing by far is like they're calling on to heroes that normally we haven't seen in the past year. But it also goes into the aspect of with this type of story, they need some special characters.
Yeah. Yeah. And the issue was issue 1 here was written by Joshua Williamson, and I haven't read a lot of his work. I know recently he was doing Justice League for a while.
Yeah.
Isn't he the one that did the big changes to Justice League?
Yes.
Yes. So, and I know for the most part, his run was being rated fairly high amongst fans as well as critics.
Oh, yeah.
I myself, I haven't read much by him. So this is the first thing I've actually sat down enthusiastically and that's written by him. And the art is Howard Porter. There were a slew of cover artists because, as with a lot of these events, we were blessed with a ridiculous amount of variant covers.
Yes.
And if time permits, and I will make sure to share the artist names if time permits. I will share the artist names for each of the covers because the variant covers are mind-blowing once again.
Amazing.
Yeah. So Williamson did overall, David, I would say did a great job with this first issue here. It's quite clever when it comes to strategy, how he wanted to get the story started, I guess, in a very quick fashion. The issue has intent and purpose, which is what I always look for, especially in stories that are designed to get the story rolling, to really get the plot moving and progressed. And I can't talk, David. I'm already messing up here. Hold on. Let me start over. So Williamson did a great job with this issue. It's quite clever in its strategy to get the story going in a very quick fashion, relatively speaking. The issue has intent and purpose, which is 2 things I always look for when it comes to that first issue. It's very key for me. And he did a good job, I guess you could say, kicking open the door for the rest of the event. And I will say kicking open the door because the way it ends, it's a great hook.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, to pull people into the story and hopefully get them invested so they want to follow along. Isn't that the goal for every writer with that first issue, if not every issue towards the end, those last few pages? Why do I want to read? Why do I want to continue? Well, you have to end your stories in a very specific way.
Yes.
Now, I should warn the listeners that we are going to talk about spoilers.
Yeah.
You've been warned.
It's tough not to talk about the spoilers in First Blood because they're so important to the story, and that hook that you talk about in the end is arguably one of the best, like, first introductions to a brand new villain. That's what we get in the very end.
Yes.
Is one of the best I've seen in a long time of a introduction of a brand new villain.
The Upside Down Man was pretty fucking cool, though.
Upside Down Man was cool, but
would you call him a mainstream villain, though?
Yeah,
because he was
Justice League Dark.
He was Justice League Dark, and Justice League Dark ended up becoming a backup story. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't call it a mainstream read, even though it is part of the main DC label.
The main DC label. And also, like,
but as a mainstream event like this, I would say this is one of the best introductions to a new villain in years. Because, like, essentially, the introduction of the Upside Down Man, it was fantastic. But you never really got the idea that the Upside Down Man could take out all of the DC universe. Much like how this brand new character does. Like, this brand new character was able to take down the Trinity. Superman, Wonder Woman, and Batman. Who... Well, Batman's human, so that's easy. I mean, he has no powers.
Essentially...
Oh, I just pissed off some Batman fans.
Oh, that's fine. Piss them off all you like. But, like, essentially, they introduced a character that legitimately took down the Justice League. And it puts us on that heels of... So, if he could take down the Trinity... What hope does Boston Brand have?
I like how Batman thought he could inject adrenaline into his heart.
Yes.
I'm going to stay awake.
And I was like, nah, this ain't going to work, Bruce. Yeah. Sorry. Good night. Because, like...
Just let's get some context here rather than just throwing out some random things. I probably shouldn't have done that. But yes. I'm not a big fan of that. But let's talk about the foundation.
Yes.
Or the foundations of the story. Background, general concept. Its key narrative anchor seems to be taken from the pages of Sandman.
Yes.
John Dee, a.k.a. Dr. Destiny, plays a vital role within the initial pages.
Yes.
Through him, they introduce the idea of the Nightmare Stone, which is a bit of a MacGuffin for now. But it works to pique interest. Especially if you are aware of Neil Gaiman's Sandman. Mm-hmm. Neil Gaiman's Sandman cosmology. I'm assuming based on how the story's set up, Williamson and the others are going to be deriving ideas from those particular storylines. I don't see how they can't when you're dealing with nightmares. Mm-hmm. We are dealing with things like nightmares, so it would be logical to surmise that the Corinthian will have some part to play.
Maybe the Corinthian. I would more or less plan on Morpheus.
Well, Corinthian is the Nightmare Man. He's the Nightmare guy.
That too.
So it would, even if he's not in it, you got to mention him. If you're dealing with sleeping and again, by default, you're going to end up dealing with the dreaming. Now, that being said, this also could simply be a way to connect the familiar with the new, because we are introduced to a new villain, one that seems to be seeking vengeance. We're not sure why as of yet, and their name is Insomnia.
Of course.
It's an interesting name. I mean,
it is.
It's also kind of a no-brainer. A nightmare.
And the character design on Insomnia is just it fits this series perfectly.
Yeah.
I mean, if you take a look at the character design of Insomnia and the fact that his eyes are peeled back, like he can't blink.
That's awesome.
It is so cool. And one of my favorite moments is Dr. Destiny in his dream state looking at him and asking, why are your eyes like that?
Yeah, the imagery is very powerful. If you are a big fan of horror, I have a feeling that horror enthusiasts will enjoy the imagery.
Oh yeah. And that's the thing I also, when Dr. Destiny first got introduced in the beginning of the issue, it got my brain working automatically, because like how did someone overpower essentially the power of the Dreamstone, which is Morpheus. The reason why Dr. Destiny is
Do we know
the way
that
he is,
we don't know that anyone overpowered it.
Well, remember, Insomnia was able to enter Dr. Destiny's dream coma state, which
But that doesn't
normally
mean
he shouldn't.
Yeah, well, who knows? We'll find out, I'm sure. But he is searching for the Nightmare Stone. That's the key point here. And the question is, to what end?
To what end?
As of the first issue, we're not certain, but the hook is that Dr. Destiny was aware of its dangerous potential. So even though we, as an audience, have never heard of the Nightmare Stone, retrospectively, they have written that Dr. Destiny did know about the Nightmare Stone. And in knowing of the stone, he also is aware of the danger that it presents. So he hid it somewhere in the nightmares of the heroes. Well, they say, it's very cool, it's poetic. He hid the Nightmare Stone in the nightmares of his enemies.
Yes.
And those enemies are the heroes and their villains.
So, like, we don't know where he exactly put it.
Yeah, and I call this the hook because it's the platform for all the other side stories as well as the core issues. That is how you set up an event that makes the reader want to pick up the next issue.
Oh yeah.
Because when you say, very ambiguous, he has hid the Nightmare Stone in A, B, C, D, E, and F. We don't know which one. You're going to want to seek out the story and find out which person has the Nightmare Stone locked away in their nightmares. So it's going to be pretty cool to see. That's another thing that's really cool. There's a mystery angle to the story, and that's also intriguing. Not a lot of comic books. I know people say, well, there's always a mystery angle. We don't know where the story is going. Sure. But this is an actual mystery that's crafted narratively. It's embedded. It is a part of the narrative.
It is a whodunit.
Yes, and that's why I really am interested in the story.
Yeah.
Now, switching gears just a bit, Dave. Deadman is the reason why we're covering this, really. Because he's part of the Constantine and Friends idea of our show here. Deadman is essentially the thread that keeps the story tidy. He's the perspective. We are witnessing the events of the story through him. He's the one that sensed something was off before the other heroes did. He even mentioned that he sensed someone like him, which seems to be a clue as to who this villain is and what he's all about. I could only assume, Dave, that he's a dead person.
I'd be thinking.
I'd be thinking, fool.
Yeah, I'd be thinking. When it comes to whodunit, Mike, I start becoming the Columbo and start going. I'd be thinking.
Yeah, so it's interesting, and the fact that he says it's someone like him, you don't just write a throwaway line like that. It's got to be a character who's dead, possibly someone that shares a similar curse. Maybe this is why he seeks vengeance.
Yeah.
But regardless, I appreciate Williamson's attention to detail when it comes to Deadman's characterization. This is something we talk about a lot. Don't write characters that you don't understand. Don't write for characters that you don't understand. We see this from time to time with John Constantine. And Deadman is one of those characters. He's a nuanced character. You have to understand what makes him tick. There's a lot of philosophy involved in his genetic makeup as a character. And if you're not understanding those key attributes and how they pertain to Deadman's overall outlook on life that then governs the very best stories that are written about this character, then you shouldn't write the character.
Yeah.
And I feel like Williamson did have a general understanding. He quickly introduces this idea to new readers. He introduces Deadman very effectively in a matter of 2 pages.
Oh, yeah.
You get the gist of the character and the idea of his loneliness, which is a very key aspect to Deadman and in many of his stories, as well as a rather optimistic view of death.
That's the thing. That's the difference in Deadman. I mean, especially like in the last couple of stories that got released about him, there's more of a focus on understanding the character that he doesn't see his existence as tragic. there is some tragedy, there's some sadness and loneliness to him. However, because Boston Brand is kind of like this cocky, a slightly arrogant type character, there's almost kind of like a really arrogant optimism to him.
There's a little bit of that, what's his name? The existentialist or absurdist philosopher, Albert Camus, who wrote the myth of Sisyphus, the story of finding optimistic pleasure in the mundane.
In the mundane, yeah.
The idea of Sisyphus pushing that stone up the hill day in, day out. Well, rather than dreading it and looking at your life as cursed, pointless, you create joy in the very meaning of pushing that stone up the hill. That's the whole point of the philosophical treatise or philosophical writings of the myth of Sisyphus. You find the pleasure and the purpose in the mundane. And in a lot of ways, that's Deadman. He is Sisyphus pushing that stone, not really gaining a lot of ground, but that's his daily chore, and he will find the pleasure in that chore.
Yeah.
And that was made clear in this issue, and that's something that not a lot of writers of Deadman usually incorporate. The idea of optimistic or an optimistic view of death, that death is something not to be grieved, but something to be viewed as beautiful.
It's beautiful.
Particularly when it comes to the loved ones you leave behind and the tears they shed for their deceased loved ones. And that does build a bit on Deadman's own self-loathing,
Yes.
guilt, and shame for the life he lived prior to his death, which they also, in 2 issues, mentioned that. And I thought that was a smart way to quickly give the highlights share the highlights of Deadman.
Because because that in itself is his start of his journey. His learning lesson is getting to where he is. That's why I really liked in two pages, Williamson was able to show that Deadman started right here, but he's right now right here. This is him in present day. And I haven't seen people touch the mythos of Deadman, the characteristics of Boston, like Williamson has done. They usually use Boston as kind of like he's that silent ghost that basically just floats into I don't want to say victims' lives, but basically like the people he has to save, he floats into their lives, saves the day. That's it.
He's usually a tool.
Yeah, he's a tool.
He's a writing device that the other characters in the show or in the stories can rely on. Whereas here, he's his own individual. And because of that, we're able to learn about him. And some of these things we already know as longtime Deadman fans. However, again, looking at Night Terrors as a bit of an entry-level type of story for potential new readers, it's a great way to reintroduce and even recontextualize the origins of Deadman for modern readers. But these key components that we're talking about, Dave, and we've talked about this on other past episodes, these key components is why I love this character and why he's one of the more underrated gems of the DC universe. Overall, Deadman's character presents readers with a philosophical framework that actually utilizes existential themes that provide a unique, thought-provoking perspective on life, identity, and the mysteries of the afterlife. That's always been a very ambiguous aspect to Deadman's story, but it's always present. And to some degree, they assert some of those notions or these notions within the subtext. I'm not saying everything is explicit. It would be awful if it was explicit.
Yeah.
But it's within the subtext. And that's why I get the general idea that Williamson has a decent handle on Deadman. Of course, I need to see more before I definitively say, Williamson has it down for Deadman. But so far, I'm leaning to the fact that he's got it down for Deadman.
Oh, even more so understanding the current history of the character. I mean, I like when we get to see Boston Brand's narration, when he gives his summary into the Trinity. You know, you see Superman save a day and he basically says you can't help but smile and everything else. But my favorite part is the one with Diana, because it showed more into Boston Brand's characteristic when Boston refers to Diana and says, "Oh yeah, I we got to hung out for a little bit. She died. She got to hung out a little bit. Then she got better, and then she left me. Story of my life."
Yeah,
and it's like,
well,
that's Boston.
It really underscores like the fact that he's a lonely individual.
He's a lonely individual, and I like the fact that Williamson was taking stuff that.
He's also isolated. You got to remember, he's also isolated from human contact.
Yeah.
Unless he enters someone else's body.
Yes.
Which presents all types of other issues.
But like, that's the thing I really liked about what Williamson was doing was, if you were a continuing DC fan, you know the story of Diana and Deadman. They just recently did Infinite Frontier. They were the main characters, and it was basically Diana's journey back to the DC universe with Boston Brand as her sidekick, as it were, or her aide, finding her way back. And if you know the story, that shows that Williamson knows what the Boston Brand character is right now, currently.
Yeah.
And like, if you read that story, it is like he's even more lonely now, because that whole story was like Boston seeing Diana being this great human being, and she becomes kind of like his inspiration in Infinite Frontier.
Yeah.
And when she leaves, it's actually one of the saddest moments for Boston Brand, because he's back by himself.
Yeah. I mean, that's another guiding aspect to Deadman stories. You know, the passing of time, experiencing it without being a part of it, the loneliness of living on, which are lines pulled. I'm quoting lines from this issue.
Yeah.
Those lines say so much about a character. It goes to show you that you don't really need to do much to convey a tone and an idea. And I like those particular word choices, the passing of time, experiencing it without being a part of it, the loneliness of living on, because they're borrowing things from literature now. Kafka's Metamorphosis, which deals with isolation and the idea of experiencing time passing and life continuing around you. And then, of course, Phenomenology, which focuses on the experience of consciousness and the relationship between time and human experience. These are all things that are being utilized for years for Deadman. And here we are again, bringing those aspects to the surface to create a pretty great snapshot of Deadman.
Yeah, because like, and that's the thing.
Isn't that how you kind of have to look at this issue as well?
Yes.
As is, it's a starting point and a snapshot.
It's a starting point and a snapshot, and also just like what you alluded to earlier, DC's strategy of this is a jumping point for newer readers. So if we introduce characters like a Deadman, we want to make sure that the new readers understand the character's motivations and characteristics. And Williamson has done something that basically I always harp about in other comics, that you have to set your characters within a certain allotted time. If by the end of the issue I do not understand the motivations of your character, that is not a good comic. Here, he was able to establish the motivation of Deadman with 4 pages. 4 pages. And essentially he does it through the narration and Boston Brand talking about his inner, I'm not saying inner demons, but inner thoughts about what he thinks of the superheroes, because he himself is a superhero. No one sees it. And I hope that basically Williamson continues that trend, and trend that we're going to show that basically Boston Brand is this unsung hero that
I really hope it goes in that direction, Dave.
yeah, that
I really do.
No one talks about, because you especially get that when Boston Brand takes over. My favorite part is when he takes over Batman's body and Diana recognizes it's Boston, and like Boston's just trying to warn them about everything. And like Diana knows who Boston Brand is. Superman knows who Boston Brand is. At the end of the day, Batman knows who Boston Brand is. And I like the fact that basically all the heroes are acknowledging Boston Brand. After Boston has been talking about for the longest time how lonely he feels. He's not really, and it's like seeing that recognition almost, you get the sense that that adds to his motivation now. He has to help these people because they're his friends. They remember him.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see what direction they take this, especially when you take into account, David, how the issue ended.
Yes.
With Insomnia tempting Deadman with something that he wants the most, which, judging by everything we just discussed, does this mean life? Does this mean a partner? Does this mean he will be able to have human contact? Is Insomnia going to manipulate Deadman with the things that really matter to him the most?
You got to think, because like I like the fact that Insomnia doesn't, it's not the physical attacks that he knows will hurt Deadman. It's the mental attacks.
Right.
Well, it's the psychological attacks.
Psychological attacks. You're absolutely right. And that's the moment. That ending line is what sealed the deal for me. I was like, okay, I'm in. I'm gonna read the rest of the issues because that's interesting.
Yeah.
To see whatever Williamson decides to bring to the surface, whatever that actually is that Deadman wants the most, it will fall in line with everything we have discussed in some way.
And I think the thing I really like too, because one of my concerns going into Night Terrors was, oh, this is going to be another Batman fest. Batman's going to save the day.
David, a lot of people thought
and a lot of people thought that.
Yeah.
And then, but at the end of the issue, they help basically tell us, no, Batman's not in the equation. It's Boston Brand that's in Batman's body. And it's almost kind of like Boston gets a chance to be alive for a little bit. And Bruce is nowhere in the equation because he's tucked away in his own personal nightmare now. So we're not gonna have.
He's gonna be taking Batman's body out for a little spin.
He's gonna be taking it for a little spin.
He's gonna be like, "Where are you, Catwoman?"
And that's why I'm like going. I'm
Bruce Wayne.
I like that. Essentially, there's telling us this is a Deadman story.
I'd be going through all of Bruce Wayne's like exes on the Rolodex. A Rolodex. Who uses that?
But you think he'd go through the back computer and go,
all right, former love interest. Let's see. I'm going to visit Catwoman. Ra's al Ghul's daughter. Isn't she Batman's the mother of his child?
The sad part would be he'd finally realize that Batman's just as lonely as him, because he'd see Catwoman and say, oh, yeah, they're not in good terms. Talia, no, not in good terms.
Oh, listen, that makes for better sex sometimes.
It's that angry sex.
Yeah, why not, Dave? I mean, shit. He should probably just close the deal on Harley as well. Harley's always been vying for some Bruce Wayne action, but Bruce Wayne doesn't go through with it. Has he? I don't think he's gone through with it.
No.
And then once you reel in Harley, you might even
get Poison Ivy.
You might even get a chance at Poison Ivy. Be a real sex sandwich.
Deadman's like going, I need to make the most out of this while
what
I'm
if
still here.
If Josh Williamson is listening right now? Man, these guys are good. These are good. I should have done all of this. Shame on me.
Josh Williamson knows Deadman needs to get laid.
He's probably more like saying, like, these guys are fucking hacks. What a fucking loser.
and see, Mike, this is why Constantine's not here. Because we need Deadman to actually get laid first.
That's true. All right. So, David, the art it was the icing.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of, and forgive my ignorance, I'm not a comic book guy per se, so I don't know what you call the actual art style, but it's the sketch look. I'm all about that look. There's just a grit to it. There's a grittiness that just feels more visceral. And as opposed to a lot of the modern art that feels like it's been done on a computer, even if this one was, at least it has that sketch look. It gives it a little bit of authenticity.
Well, the thing about it is, like, especially with the type of story that they're telling, which is essentially it's supposed to be a horror comic book. It's going to be a callback to like all the old, visceral, gory, scarefest comics back from the 70s. And that's the thing I really took out of this was like, it gave me vibes that they went into this with Joshua Williamson and Howard Porter. With Porter as the artist, he knew what genre he was working in.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, some of my favorite panels of his could be deemed as some of the most goriest. But if you look at it, there's almost like some weird artistic taste to it when they come across Dr. Destiny's body and it's impaled on the Justice League table.
Yeah.
And, that would be an awesome gore image in itself, but there's a certain artistry to making that work. There's no blood elements on it by far. There's no the thing that amazes me when you take a look at Dr. Destiny impaled on the table, all you really see is basically the black spikes sticking out of him, and you see a purple energy just cracking him in half.
Yeah, his body splits open.
His body splits open.
And his innards just explode out.
But there's not a focus of red gore. You know what I mean? Like, people would say that, there has to be a blood shower everywhere. No. There's a weird
sometimes the horrific can be sold better when you are subtle.
When you're subtle, yeah.
Not being able to see the complete picture sometimes it has a better effect.
Or even when
it's suggestive.
Or even when one of my favorite panels is when Boston Brand is puked out by Batman.
Yeah, that's a great page.
It is a fantastic page. Seeing Batman yell, "Get out," and then all of a sudden, literally vomit the spiritual essence of Boston out of him. Normally, you don't see that.
That sounds very homoerotic.
It kind of does, doesn't it? But normally, you would just see Boston just exit the body. Normal as anything. But there's a visceral feeling you get to this. It's like watching John Carpenter's The Thing.
Yeah, there you go.
And the last comic that we ever got this same thing was Swamp Thing.
I'm looking for the right word for it. It feels present. I that's the only word that comes to mind. It feels very physical.
Yeah.
I guess that's a word we can use.
It's really tough to actually put it into words. Tangible, maybe?
Yeah. The art's very good. And I don't think I've read anything that Howard Porter has done the art on. But I'll be looking for this guy's work because I'm sold.
Oh, yeah.
Definitely sold.
Especially if he sticks with this genre.
Yeah. All right. So we will be back, Dave, with another discussion, Night Terrors #1. And that will be 1 of 4. And then also, shortly after, we will release our discussion on Night Terrors Zatanna #1. So, David, my score for this particular issue here is an 85%. It's a strong read. It's a strong start. It's not perfect. This isn't Vertigo. This isn't DC Black Label. It's a mainstream piece, and it works very well as a mainstream piece. They do all the right things. Go ahead, Dave.
I would have to. I'm going back and forth with the score that I have originally in my notes, but I'm thinking about it now. I'm going to go with my gut and basically say that this is an 88.
You sound like you're about to choose your lover on The Bachelor. Well, I'm going to go with my gut.
Because, dude, the more I've read this issue, the more I'm like digging Night Terrors. Like, especially without going into spoilers with anything else, because like a typical comic book geek.
No, you could do spoilers if you need to, as long as it's not spoilers for another issue.
Yeah. That's the thing. I don't want to go into any other issues.
Okay.
Because
how dare you, Dave?
I've been a typical comic book geek, and I read ahead, and I'm really digging Williamson's work on it. And it's like so hilarious because I've read a couple of the issues, and I'm like looking at it going, you know what's missing out of this, Mike? Tom Taylor.
Yeah, so Tom Taylor's not a part of this event.
Yeah, Taylor's not a part of this.
Is he a bit of a black sheep in DC? Like it seems it seems like he's always doing his own thing.
I have no idea because I realized while going through my notes for this particular series, I made the comment in my notes. It's kind of strange that the two characters that Taylor's working on currently are not in Night Terrors. And John Kent, Superman, is not in it.
That's not Superman.
And
don't
Constantine.
Call him he's not working. What's he doing, Constantine? What Constantine?
Taylor's been very, very proactive with wanting to be part of the John Constantine writing thing. So
David, if we go to Comic Book Roundup, critics are giving it a 7.7. I don't know if I agree with that. I don't think they're actually digging into really what's going on here.
Yeah, because like I think initial like viewings from critics, when it came to Night Terrors, everyone did not have high hopes for this.
The average user rating is 7.
Yeah, a lot of people at the very beginning did not have high hopes for this. But now that basically there have been a couple of issues,
so
Night Terrors 1 came out.
Wait, hold on. So you're saying the First Blood underwhelmed, but they kept reading, and now they love it? That doesn't.
I wouldn't say they're underwhelmed, but I think that comic book fans did what comic fans do, and shit all over a series before they actually opened the book.
Yeah,
and then
I don't agree with 7.7.
I don't agree with 7.7,
and maybe 80 because maybe an 8.0 because I was going back and forth with my score. Should it be an 85? Should it be an 82? And because the art, I jumped it up. If I was basing it just on story, it would probably be an 80 or an 81, which would be equivalent to an 8.0 here on Comic Book Roundup. But definitely the average user rating, 7.1. Listen, as I said a few moments ago, David, it's not a DC Dark label.
No.
This isn't Cy Spurrier's Constantine. This isn't Ram V's Swamp Thing. But this is a pretty good mainstream event.
Yeah.
It's a fun event.
And I'm not kidding. I'm basically... I wasn't kidding when I actually, early in the show, I said, I've seen fans now talking about Night Terrors as the series that basically DC looked at Marvel and said, this is how it's done. And they're proving to be the best event story of the year for right now.
The highest rated Night Terrors title so far is Superman at an 8.8.
That one, without going into spoilers, I did like that one. I did like it.
Who wrote it? Do you know?
Not offhand. I think I can look that up real quick.
It's Josh Williamson.
But yeah, I did like his take on Superman's nightmares.
Give me a second here. I'm gonna jump the gun here. And see what this... Okay. Zatanna's rated fairly high.
And Zatanna's is really cool.
Good. Oh, you know what? Catwoman takes the highest rating with an 8.9. So, all right. Well, you know what, David? This does bring us to the end of our show. I want to thank everyone for listening. Stay tuned for more discussions. Thank you, David.
Thank you.